Our devotional today is entitled Listening to Our Neighbor. It's by Scott Stoner. It could be said that Jesus' whole life was about telling everyone to look outside themselves and listen to their neighbors and love the people around them. Randall Curtis. In his reflection yesterday, Randall Curtis beautifully introduced our theme for this week of listening to our neighbor. Along with focusing on the current theme, I'd like to note that continuing any of the contemplative practices that Robin Brent introduced last week will enhance our ability to hear God's call to listen and to love our neighbor. And as we connect more deeply with the holy in our lives, a natural fruit of that connection will be to more deeply and genuinely listen to our neighbor. Jesus taught us that one of the great commandments is to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. The reality is that we do tend to do just that. For example, if we are impatient and critical with ourselves, we will tend to be impatient and critical with others. And if we are kind and forgiving with ourselves, we will tend to be that way with others as well. As I wrote in an earlier reflection in this devotional, I believe there is a similar connection between how we listen to ourselves and how we listen to our neighbors. We will discover just how hard it is to truly listen to our neighbors, especially when we disagree with them or when listening to them requires us to stretch outside our comfort zones. But as we see in the gospel passage for yesterday about Jesus turning over the tables of the money changers, Jesus sometimes has a way of challenging us to listen in ways that can make us uncomfortable. I pray that we will grow in our ability to listen to our neighbors this week. Making it personal. What do you think of the idea that listening to others is an act of love? What do you think of the idea that we can't fully love someone until we are willing to listen, to truly listen to them? If you asked people who know you well, do you think they would affirm that you are a good listener? As I read today's devotion, I was reminded of an experience I had over 20 years ago that had a profound impact on me. I'd like to share that with you in light of the comment that Scott Stoner makes about how hard it is to listen to our neighbors, especially when listening to them requires us to stretch outside our comfort zones. Many of you will remember the work of the Stop the Violence Coalition. Clay Turner served as one of the volunteer co-chairs, Nancy Holmes and I were the staff members, and Charlie Tulloh was our board chair during the early years. For those of you unfamiliar with Stop the Violence, it was the community response to a senseless murder in 1994 of Ernest Rice Sr. The drive-by shooting happened in the parking lot of the First Baptist Church downtown following a basketball game. Many of you watching this now know Ernest Rice Jr., an educator, an outstanding leader, and mentor in Spartanburg School District 7. During the early stages of Stop the Violence, we organized ourselves into action teams. They were designed to be equally diverse, bringing many white people and black people together, some for the first time. One of those teams was young black men. At the time, I was 30 years old, a white female with very little exposure to young black men. We held a meeting in the former Tobe Hartwell housing development on the south side of Spartanburg. It was a very dense housing development that has long been demolished. Carver Middle School and Mary H. Wright Elementary, as well as new housing, replaced the old Tobe development. I still remember sitting in the community space, surrounded by young men that Eugene Goodwin, who was the manager at the time, had invited to come and share their stories of growing up on the south side of Spartanburg in government-owned housing. The young men were nervous, as I can imagine. So were we. But we shared that time and space, and it seemed like an important thing to be doing. That was when I began to wrestle with the question, am I my brother's keeper? Something I continue to struggle with to this day. I know during a pandemic it's difficult to share experiences like the one I described, but a day will be coming, hopefully soon, where we can sit down with our neighbors and listen to their stories. Many groups have continued to work during the pandemic, and they need us to step out of our comfort zones and into their spaces to listen, love, and serve. I hope we will take advantage of those opportunities. Like my life was impacted all those years ago, let's continue to be changed as we love our neighbors as ourselves. God's blessings to you all. Have a great day.